Why do the foolish rise to power while the wise are left behind? Have you ever wondered why the people with the most intelligence, integrity, and self-awareness often struggle to lead, while the loudest, boldest, and sometimes the most incompetent seem to dominate? Why do the thinkers hesitate while the pretenders surge forward? From overconfident tech CEOs to manipulative politicians and social media personalities who command millions, we're watching a global pattern unfold. Power is no longer granted to those who deserve it. It's given to those who appear to deserve it. And that single illusion is transforming our world. You might think this is random or unjust. But what if I told you it's neither? What if this is not chaos but design? A cold, calculated mechanism that rewards performance over substance, image over depth. One that Machiavelli warned us about over 500 years ago. A psychological machine that still governs who rises and who falls. This video is not just about Machiavelli. It is a psychological blueprint of how power works, why it rewards not the wise, but those who seem wise. And once you understand this system, you'll never see leadership, influence, or authority the same way again. We'll explore truths most people aren't ready to face. Why Socrates, one of the greatest thinkers in history, was executed, not honored. Why the least competent are often the most confident, and how the Dunning-Kruger effect explains this. Why your brain is wired to follow certainty, even when it's completely wrong. How modern leaders surround themselves with loyalty, not competence, and create systems that collapse from within. And why morality, in the world of power, is often a disadvantage unless it's paired with strategy. This journey will take you deep into the human mind, into our need for clarity, our fear of complexity, and our dangerous craving for simplicity in uncertain times. This isn't just theory. This is a psychological map of history, business, politics, and your own life. What you will gain by the end of this video. 1. You'll understand why the world often rewards illusion, not reality, and how not to be deceived by it. 2. You'll see how foolish individuals manufacture confidence and why that illusion is so persuasive. 3. You'll learn how to protect yourself from the manipulation of appearances, especially in leadership and media. 4. Most importantly, you'll discover how to develop psychological clarity, not by speaking louder, but by thinking deeper. Because in a world driven by perception, your first real power is not control over others, but the ability to see through the illusion. The illusion of power. It's comforting to believe that power goes to those who earn it. That the most capable minds, the clearest thinkers, and the most ethical voices eventually rise to the top. But this belief is not just false, it's dangerous. Because in reality, power is not granted to the most competent. It's awarded to those who appear competent. And that illusion, more than any truth, is what governs human behavior. Machiavelli saw this centuries ago. Unlike the philosophers of his time who dreamed of ideal rulers and moral governance, Machiavelli studied the world as it really was, ruthless, deceptive, and governed by appearance. In his famous book, The Prince, he made a chilling observation: everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. This simple sentence holds terrifying implications. Because if people judge you by appearance, then reality becomes irrelevant. And if reality is irrelevant, then leadership becomes a game of performance, not substance. This illusion isn't just an idea, it plays out constantly. Think of the loud, confident manager in a meeting who dominates the conversation. They speak with certainty, shrug off complexity, and project authority even when they're wrong. Meanwhile, the quiet, thoughtful colleague who actually sees the full picture hesitates. They weigh their words, acknowledge uncertainty, and offer nuanced insights. But their doubt is mistaken for weakness. Their depth is dismissed. And the confident one wins. Psychologists have a name for this: the confidence heuristic. It's the tendency of human beings to equate confidence with competence. When someone projects certainty, we assume they must know what they're talking about. But certainty is not knowledge. It's a feeling, often an unearned one. This is the tragic mismatch Machiavelli understood. The human brain is drawn to the illusion of strength, not the presence of wisdom. We are far more influenced by how someone makes us feel than by what they actually know. In fact, this illusion is so powerful that entire systems are built on it. Politicians win elections not by being the most qualified, but by appearing relatable, dominant, or visionary. CEOs are celebrated not for the sustainability of their business models, but for their charisma and boldness. Social media influencers gain millions of followers, not because they understand reality, but because they master the art of performance. And so the illusion grows. What makes this more dangerous is how invisible it becomes. Once someone attains power through image, they gain resources to reinforce that image. Media, wealth, loyal followers, all tools to maintain the illusion and suppress dissent. The performance becomes reality, not because it's true, but because it's repeated loudly, constantly, and with conviction. So what happens to real wisdom? Often, it's silenced, dismissed, or ignored. Because wisdom tends to speak softly. It questions rather than declares. It searches rather than concludes. And in a world addicted to certainty, wisdom is a threat. This raises the first and most haunting question of our journey. If the world chooses leaders not for who they are, but for how they seem, then how many of the people we follow are illusions in disguise? The Socratic curse. To truly understand how dangerous real wisdom can be in a world ruled by appearances, we need only look back to one of the most iconic figures in Western thought, Socrates. Socrates was not a ruler, not a general, and not a wealthy man. He didn't wear the robes of power. He wandered the streets of Athens barefoot, asking questions, deep, uncomfortable questions. He didn't claim to know everything. In fact, he famously said, "I know that I know nothing." But that one statement, so humble, so honest, would become his greatest liability. To the common citizen, Socrates was a threat. He questioned the gods. He questioned authority. He questioned assumptions. And worst of all, he refused to offer easy answers. In a society that was increasingly afraid, uncertain, and looking for strong voices, Socrates was the wrong kind of voice. Not because he was wrong, but because he made others feel uncertain too. And so, despite his brilliance, despite his moral clarity, Socrates was put on trial and sentenced to death. His crime? Corrupting the youth. But in truth, his only offense was thinking too deeply in a society that preferred clarity over truth. This is what we call the Socratic curse, the tragic fate of those who carry true insight in a world that fears it. The more honestly you speak, the more likely you are to threaten the illusions that hold others together. Modern psychology explains this with surprising precision. Human beings are cognitive misers. We conserve mental energy. We seek shortcuts. We crave answers that feel good. And when someone like Socrates enters the room and challenges those shortcuts, he doesn't inspire us. He destabilizes us. This isn't just an ancient story. The Socratic curse repeats today in boardrooms, classrooms, politics, and families. The thoughtful employee who raises difficult ethical questions is labeled difficult. The academic who offers complex nuance is ignored in favor of the influencer with 10-second slogans. The moral leader who cautions against populist rage is silenced for lacking strength. Why? Because doubt looks like weakness. Complexity feels like indecision. And in times of fear or crisis, people don't follow the one who says it's complicated. They follow the one who shouts, "I have the answer." This is the same dynamic that allows demagogues to rise. When Socrates offered a mirror, populists offered a promise. When he raised questions, they raised flags. And the crowd, desperate for certainty, chose the flag. There's a chilling lesson here. In a world that confuses certainty with competence, real wisdom often walks straight into exile. And yet, Socrates remains a symbol, not of defeat, but of integrity. Because in the face of death, he drank the poison calmly. He refused to betray his search for truth. So we are left with a modern question. In a society addicted to confidence, what happens to the people who dare to say, "I might be wrong"? The Dunning-Kruger effect. how the least competent become the most confident. There's a peculiar irony in the psychology of leadership. The people who know the least often believe they know the most. And the ones who actually understand the complexities of a situation, they hesitate, they doubt, they pause before they speak. This paradox has a name: the Dunning-Kruger effect. In 1999, psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger published a now famous study revealing a cognitive blind spot that continues to shape our world. They discovered that individuals with low ability in a given area often overestimate their competence. Not because they're arrogant, but because they lack the very skills needed to recognize their own ignorance. In simpler terms, incompetence robs you of the ability to see that you're incompetent. And confidence, in these cases, becomes a byproduct of ignorance, not mastery. Now, think of how this plays out in leadership, politics, business. The boldest, most decisive voices are often the ones who know the least. They offer simple solutions to complex problems. They sound certain, clear, and reassuring. And because our minds are wired to prefer confidence over nuance, we trust them. Meanwhile, those with actual insight are burdened by it. They understand the variables, the contradictions, the unknowns. They speak in probabilities, not absolutes. They say it depends when asked for answers. But that caution, that honesty, is mistaken for weakness. And so the truly competent are dismissed, while the incompetent take center stage. The Dunning-Kruger effect doesn't just explain bad leadership. It explains why bad leadership is so persuasive, because we mistake the loud for the wise. We confuse certainty with strength. We are drawn to the energy of confidence, even when it's completely disconnected from reality. This effect is amplified in environments where appearance matters more than performance. Social media, for instance, rewards charisma over substance. A viral soundbite can do more for someone's influence than years of experience or study. In these spaces, overconfidence isn't a flaw, it's a strategy. But here's the deeper psychological twist. Those who are truly competent tend to understate their expertise. They see the vastness of what they don't know. They compare their knowledge to the full scope of the problem, and they respond with humility. This is why genuine experts often doubt themselves, while imposters speak with unwavering conviction. This dynamic is not just frustrating, it's dangerous. Because it means that, in many cases, the people we trust the most are the ones who are least qualified to lead us. And the ones we overlook may be the only ones telling us the truth. The Dunning-Kruger effect doesn't merely expose individual blind spots. It exposes a collective vulnerability. We are all susceptible to confusing confidence with competence. So we're left with a sobering question. If confidence can be faked, and if people follow confidence, then how do we ever find real leadership in a world dominated by illusion? The confidence illusion. Why arrogance wins over truth. We've already seen how confidence can deceive us. But what if confidence isn't just a trait, it's a weapon? One that can shape perceptions so powerfully, it builds empires on illusions? This is not just a theory. It's a recurring pattern across modern history, from politics to business. And few stories illustrate it more clearly than the rise and fall of Adam Neumann, the charismatic founder of Waring. Neumann didn't create groundbreaking technology. He didn't revolutionize architecture or real estate. What he sold was a vision of a company that would reshape the future of work and human connection. He delivered this vision with absolute conviction. He spoke with the kind of bold certainty that silenced doubt before it could form. He didn't hesitate. He didn't waver. And that illusion of total control, of prophetic genius, drew billions of dollars from investors around the world. People weren't investing in his business model, they were investing in his confidence. But beneath that shiny exterior was a company bleeding money. WeWork's business fundamentals were weak, unsustainable, and in many cases, purely aspirational. And yet, the illusion held for years, until it collapsed. Neumann's downfall wasn't just a corporate failure. It was a psychological lesson. Arrogance, when delivered with enough certainty, can override truth. Why does this happen? Because, psychologically, human beings are hardwired to seek certainty. In times of stress, complexity, or fear, we crave the leader who says, "I know the way." Even if they're wrong, even if their vision is empty, because it feels better than the one who says, "This is complicated, and I don't have all the answers." This creates what psychologists call the confidence illusion, the tendency to overvalue the opinions of those who speak forcefully and to undervalue those who speak thoughtfully. In environments where people feel overwhelmed, the loudest voice often drowns out the most accurate one. This illusion is not limited to corporate boardrooms. You see it in elections, where charisma triumphs over competence. You see it in crisis communication, where calm uncertainty loses to fiery conviction. You see it in everyday life, where people with strong opinions are mistaken for people with strong understanding. But this isn't just a flaw in individual judgment, it's a flaw in the system. Because when arrogance is rewarded, it becomes a path to power. The more confidently someone performs, the more attention they gain. The more attention they gain, the more people follow. And the illusion becomes self-sustaining. Confidence, in the hands of the unqualified, becomes a mask. A mirror that reflects back what people want to see, rather than what they need to hear. And so, we find ourselves asking, in a world where truth whispers and confidence shouts, how many of our leaders are merely echoing what we want to believe? Cognitive misers, why we prefer simple lies to complex truth. There's a fundamental truth about the human brain that explains much of what we've uncovered so far. We are wired to take mental shortcuts. We don't process the world in full, rich detail. We filter, we simplify, and we conserve cognitive energy wherever we can. Psychologists call this the cognitive miser phenomenon. Our brains, shaped by evolution, tend to avoid complexity whenever possible. We don't like uncertainty. We resist nuance. And we instinctively turn away from anything that feels mentally exhausting, even if it's true. Now imagine what this means in a world filled with complexity, climate change, geopolitical tensions, economic instability, and ethical dilemmas with no clear answers. In such a world, the person who says it's complicated loses, and the one who declares it's simple wins. Not because they're right, but because they offer relief. Take, for example, the issue of climate change. Real scientists, the ones immersed in decades of data, speak in cautious probabilities. There's a high likelihood, the models suggest. It depends on our actions. This is the language of intellectual honesty, but it sounds weak. In contrast, populist voices cut through the uncertainty with seductive clarity. It's all a hoax. It's exaggerated. Don't worry, technology will fix it. These claims are wrong, but they are emotionally satisfying. They require no further thought, no uncomfortable change, just acceptance. And that is precisely why they win. A study at Yale University revealed something even more unsettling. When participants were shown complex mathematical data about a political issue, their ability to interpret the data accurately dropped if the results challenged their beliefs. In fact, the most mathematically skilled participants showed the strongest bias. They didn't use their intelligence to seek the truth. They used it to defend what they emotionally wanted to believe. This finding shattered a hopeful myth that intelligence alone will protect us from illusion. It doesn't. Without emotional discipline, even the smartest minds become tools of rationalization, not discovery. When certainty is desired, the mind will twist any fact to support it. And leaders who understand this vulnerability can manipulate perception with ease. This explains why we so often choose confidence over competence, simplicity over depth, slogans over policy. We aren't just misled. We want to be misled because complexity is uncomfortable. And illusion is soothing. This, perhaps, is the most dangerous truth yet. When people stop seeking truth and start seeking comfort, they become easy prey for those who promise clarity no matter how false it is. So, we must ask ourselves, in a world overflowing with complexity, are we using our intelligence to think or just to protect what we already believe? Institutionalized incompetence, how weak leaders build weak systems. So far, we've examined how illusion rises over substance, how the confident outperform the wise, and how simplicity outshines truth. But the consequences don't stop at individual leaders. When the illusion of competence reaches power, it spreads. It replicates itself. And over time, it creates something far more dangerous than one foolish ruler. It creates an entire system of incompetence. Machiavelli saw this clearly. He warned that rulers do not surround themselves with the best minds. They surround themselves with the most loyal, the least threatening. Those who affirm their image, rather than challenge their ideas. In his words, the first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him. But what happens when those men, or today, executives, advisors, and deputies, are chosen not for talent, but for submission? You get a fortress of mediocrity, a bureaucracy of yes-men, a hierarchy where no one dares to speak truth to power. In this structure, bad decisions are protected, not corrected. And failure becomes invisible until it's catastrophic. History offers countless examples. In ancient Rome, Emperor Commodus succeeded the philosopher King Marcus Aurelius. But unlike his father, Commodus replaced competent administrators with flatterers. He was more interested in personal loyalty than public service. The result? Decay from within, leading to one of the most spectacular collapses in civilization. More recently, under Robert Mugabe's rule in Zimbabwe, capable economists and judges were pushed out. Replaced by loyalists, corruption flourished, and the economy spiraled into chaos. Not because of a single mistake, but because the system had lost the ability to correct itself. Even in the corporate world, this pattern repeats. Companies led by insecure CEOs often promote those who reflect their views, not those who challenge them. Innovation is stifled. Independent thought is punished. The culture becomes one of survival, not excellence. Psychology offers a precise explanation. It's called Homophily, the tendency of individuals to gravitate toward those who are similar to them. Insecure leaders don't want brilliance around them. They want mirrors. People who think the same way, speak the same way, and most importantly, never pose a threat. This leads to what researchers call a competence threat. And so the leader doesn't just avoid competence, they actively suppress it. And once this system is built, it sustains itself. Weak leaders promote even weaker successors. The talent pipeline dries up. The institution decays. Not because of enemies, but because of rot at the top that slowly poisons everything below. This is the legacy of unchecked illusion. It doesn't just fool people. It rewires systems. And those systems, once hollowed out, take decades, sometimes generations, to recover. So the question is no longer about one foolish leader. The real question is, how many of our institutions are already built on illusions too fragile to be challenged and too weak to survive the truth? And homophily and the competence threat, how mediocrity protects itself. When a weak leader rises to power, we might assume the problem ends with them, that once they're removed, things will improve. But the reality is far more insidious. Because bad leadership doesn't just fail, it reproduces. And it does so through two powerful psychological forces, homophily and competence threat. Homophily is simple. It's the tendency of people to surround themselves with others who are similar in background, in thinking, in comfort zone. It's why executives hire people who remind them of themselves. It's why politicians pick advisors who share their worldview. Familiarity feels safe. Dissonance feels dangerous. But when you add power and insecurity to that instinct, something darker happens. Enter the competence threat. Research in organizational psychology shows that insecure leaders actively avoid surrounding themselves with competent people. Why? Because competence shines a light on their inadequacy. A talented subordinate becomes a mirror they don't want to look into. And instead of learning from that mirror, they smash it. This is why mediocrity doesn't just happen, it protects itself. A weak leader doesn't want challenge. They want affirmation. They don't recruit the best ideas. They recruit the safest personalities. People who won't question. People who won't outshine them. People who know the rules of survival in a fragile ecosystem, say little, challenge nothing, keep your job. And over time, These systems calcify. They grow layers of bureaucratic armor. Talent is filtered out. Insight is seen as arrogance. Initiative is punished. The only currency that matters is loyalty. We see this not just in governments or corporations, but in entire cultures. Societies where challenging authority is labeled disrespectful. Workplaces where the quiet genius is ignored in favor of the loud flatterer. Education systems that reward obedience over curiosity. Machiavelli predicted this dynamic centuries ago. In The Prince, he warned rulers to be cautious of their advisors not because they might be wrong, but because those with true insight might also carry ambition. His advice? Choose those who are loyal, predictable, and easy to control. Not the wisest, the safest. But safety comes at a cost. Systems built on loyalty over competence inevitably rot. They become echo chambers. No one dares to say what needs to be said. Problems are hidden, not solved. And by the time truth breaks through, the damage is irreversible. This is why foolishness at the top is not a personal flaw. It becomes a cultural infection. It teaches everyone below it that the way to survive is to blend in, not to rise up. And so we face a painful realization. Mediocrity doesn't fall from the sky. It is selected, cultivated, and institutionalized by those afraid of being seen for who they really are. So the question turns inward. If you were in a position of power, would you have the courage to surround yourself with people smarter than you, or would you, too, build a kingdom of mirrors? Broken systems. Why incompetent leaders stay in power? We often assume that incompetence eventually collapses under its own weight. That a bad leader, exposed by failure, will be removed. That truth will catch up. But history and psychology tell a darker story. When systems are broken, incompetence doesn't just survive, it thrives. This isn't about one flawed person. It's about structures that protect failure. In a healthy system, feedback is immediate. A surgeon whose patients die doesn't stay in practice. An engineer whose bridges collapse loses trust and license. These professions are unforgiving because the results are visible, measurable, and irreversible. There's no hiding. But in politics, finance, and even some corporate cultures, feedback is delayed, distorted, or deliberately avoided. Mistakes can be spun. Consequences can be hidden. Leaders can deflect blame downward, sideways, anywhere but inward. This is why some of the worst decisions in history were not corrected, they were repeated. Take the Soviet Union. For decades, layers of bureaucracy protected top officials from the fallout of their failures. Economic mismanagement, corruption, and repression continued not because people didn't know better, but because the system lacked internal correction. There were no real consequences for being wrong, only for being disloyal. Or consider the 2008 financial crisis. Executives who gambled with other people's futures walked away with golden parachutes. Their institutions collapsed, but they didn't. Why? Because the system was designed to privatize gains and socialize losses. Power, not performance, determined survival. In both cases, the deeper failure wasn't individual, it was structural. The system didn't reward honesty. It rewarded short-term wins, image management, and internal loyalty. And when the smoke cleared, the same structures were still in place, ready to repeat the cycle. Psychology explains why this happens. Human beings are status quo biased. We resist change even when change is necessary. We also fear uncertainty more than failure. An incompetent leader who brings predictability is often favored over a competent reformer who introduces discomfort. And in these environments, the illusion of competence becomes self-reinforcing. A leader stays in power long enough to reshape the narrative, to revise history, to rewrite failures as noble efforts or misunderstood brilliance. The story changes faster than the facts. This creates a chilling effect. Those who tell the truth are sidelined. Those who play along are promoted. The longer the system runs on illusion, the harder it becomes to dismantle it. Machiavelli understood this better than most. He saw that once a leader controls perception, they control power. Not by being competent, but by managing the illusion of competence and eliminating those who see through it. So if we want to know why incompetent leaders don't disappear, we must stop looking at individuals and start looking at the ecosystems that protect them. Because the real danger isn't just who rises, it's how long they're allowed to stay. So the question now becomes, how many of our institutions are built to reward the truth, and how many are just keeping the lie alive a little longer? Power vs. morality. Why ethics are often a disadvantage. We like to believe that moral integrity leads to influence. That good people, guided by principle, eventually triumph over those who deceive, exploit, or manipulate. But Machiavelli, ever the realist, offered a painful correction. It is necessary for a prince who wishes to maintain his position to learn how not to be good. He didn't say leaders must be evil. He said they must learn how not to be bound by goodness when it stands in the way of strategy. Because in the ruthless arena of power, morality is not always an asset. Often, it's a liability. Why? Because real morality comes with limits. It forces you to say no when the world demands yes. It makes you pause when the game demands speed. It leads you to protect the vulnerable even if that costs you position, profit, or praise. Ethical leaders are constrained not by weakness, but by conscience. And in a system that rewards aggression, self-promotion, and certainty, conscience slows you down. The ones who rise fastest are often the ones unburdened by such restraint. Take ancient Rome. He believed in the Republic, in law, in reasoned debate. But he could not outmaneuver Julius Caesar, who saw power not as a moral calling, but as a battlefield. Caesar made ruthless alliances. He crossed sacred lines. He marched on Rome itself. And while Cicero died trying to preserve virtue, Caesar reshaped the empire by abandoning it. The modern world repeats this pattern. Studies show that leaders with psychopathic traits, superficial charm, lack of empathy, manipulativeness are overrepresented in senior position. Why? Because they aren't slowed by ethical dilemmas. They aren't haunted by uncertainty. They see people as tools and decisions as moves in a game. Meanwhile, ethical managers, those who care about fairness, long-term impact, emotional well-being, often find themselves burned out, bypassed, or quietly pushed out. They spend energy protecting others. Their competitors spend energy advancing themselves. It's what game theorists call a race to the bottom. Once one player abandons ethical constraints and succeeds, others feel pressured to do the same. If they don't, they fall behind. And so, morality isn't lost overnight. It's slowly bled out of the system, one compromise at a time. Machiavelli wasn't celebrating this. He was exposing it. He understood that good people, when thrown into broken systems, often lose. Not because they lack intelligence, but because they carry a weight others have abandoned. So what do we do with this? It's not enough to tell good people to be louder or fight harder. We must design systems that don't punish morality. Systems where transparency, accountability, and feedback loops expose illusion and reward competence, not just confidence. Because if we don't, we create a world where only the ruthless survive. And that leaves us with a final, brutal question. If morality slows you down in the race for power, can goodness ever win without first becoming strategic? Psychological defense. How to see through the illusion of power. By now, the picture is clear and deeply unsettling. We live in a world where certainty is mistaken for competence, performance is rewarded over substance, and systems protect the illusion even when reality is falling apart. So the question becomes, what do we do with this knowledge? We begin by recognizing that power, in its modern form, is often built not on truth but on psychological manipulation. And the first step to defending ourselves is not political or economic. It's mental. It's the decision to stop mistaking confidence for wisdom. This is the art of psychological defense. The human brain, shaped by millennia of survival instincts, is vulnerable to simplicity. In moments of fear or uncertainty, we crave clear answers, strong voices, and emotional relief. This craving makes us easy to deceive and hard to enlighten. But when you begin to see the patterns, something changes. You start noticing how the most confident voices often lack substance. How truly competent individuals express doubt not because they're weak, but because they know how complex truth really is. You begin to question not just what is being said, but how it's being delivered and why it makes you feel the way it does. You also learn to distrust your attraction to ease. When someone says, "I alone can fix it," alarm bells should ring. When someone offers a solution that's simple, perfect, and absolute, it's almost always a lie. Real solutions require trade-offs. Real leaders invite complexity. Real wisdom feels heavier, not lighter. Machiavelli understood that illusion would always be more seductive than truth. But he also understood the power of awareness. Once you see the game being played, you're no longer just a piece on the board, you start becoming a player. And in a world ruled by illusion, seeing clearly is the first real form of resistance. So what does this look like in practice? It means asking hard questions when others stay silent. It means rewarding honesty even when it's uncomfortable. It means refusing to follow voices that offer certainty without humility. It means choosing leaders not for how they look or how they sound, but for what they consistently do when no one is watching. Most of all, it means understanding that you are vulnerable too. Intelligence alone isn't protection. Even the smartest minds can be hijacked by emotion. But when you train yourself to pause, to reflect, to look deeper, you slowly build immunity to the illusion. So here we are. The world may not always reward truth. It may reward the loud, the simple, the confident, and the ruthless. But that doesn't mean you have to play their game. Because the first real power is not the power to rule others, it's the power to see clearly in a world built to deceive you. And that power begins the moment you stop asking, "Who looks like a leader?" and start asking, "Who is quietly carrying the weight of truth?"